And when they looked on these files, and I worked with the National Archives here in the UK to pick out some cases that might be of interest. When they looked, they saw, okay, some of these are misidentifications. Yes, there are some aircraft flights, weather balloons, satellites, meteors, etc. But look, when they looked deeper, they saw that there were indeed some cases where UFOs had been tracked on radar, seen by commercial airline pilots, seen by military pilots with jets being scrambled. And I think when the media saw that last year, they realised that they'd been had. The powers that be for far too long had used phrases like little green men and flying saucers to disparage this, but when they actually looked at the files, they thought, hang on a minute, there's something interesting here, serious defense and national security issues.
Hello, when people are going to start waking up? There's a guy 25 years with the British government saying this. Our next clip is from Dr. Roger Lear. Come on up for a second, Roger. I'm going to have you introduce yourself. I'm going to have you introduce your own clip. I had posed a question to Roger some time ago of whether he knew where these alien implants were coming from. But he's now at a point where he believes they're coming from something very unusual, aren't you?
Absolutely. We have shown beyond the shadow of a doubt, and I make this statement officially, and I hope it goes all over the world at the press conference on Monday, that these are not from here, these are from extraterrestrial sources and perhaps outside of our solar system.
I had witnessed one of his operations that he had done several years ago with a woman who, and on radio, I have to emphasize this, had an implant in her cheek. And then I said her face cheek. Her cheek. And this thing, every time they tried to get it out, did what?
Boo!
They could not get it until hours later. They kept digging into her face cheek, and they pulled this out. It was remarkable.
That sounds a little gross, George.
You're the surgeon?
Yes, but what you see and what you get are two different things.
That's true. So here's a clip of Dr. Roger Lear.
We just walked out to look at the sky and trying to decide which direction we're going to go to see maybe we could see something. So again, all this activity was going, and we saw what we thought were three F-16s, two ahead and one trailing, and then there was another one on the left side. And all of a sudden, I think it was Jordan that said, "Oh, look at that! Where the two F-16s are in front, it just blocked out that star." And I said, "Now, wait a minute." So I grabbed the binoculars and we looked, and this thing was a triangle. I don't know how big the one Hart saw was, but
That's pretty good size.
this thing was huge. It blocked out a huge portion of the sky, and the strobing that we thought, were the F-16s was a strobing light, which is in each corner of the triangle, and then to the left rear of it was an F-16 that was trailing it. But there you go. And again, staying there were three Belgian pilots, and evidently we have an exchange program going on between Belgium and the U.S.
Yes.
These guys were going to fly the following week, so when they're off base, they can stay wherever they want. So they were staying also at the little alien. And on the last day, we were getting ready to leave. I was alone with one of them in the restaurant, and they were telling him, what we saw, and he just smiled at me. He says, "Well, let me tell you, everything you hear about Area 51 is true."
He's one of the best. And again, thank you, Roger, so much. Right, I was not a surgeon. I am not an investigator. I am a facilitator. We get guests like Roger Lear, like Stephen Bassett, and we get them on the program so you can hear what's going on. That's my job, that's my role. Other investigators like Linda Moulton Howe and our next clip, Italo-American journalist Paula Harris, who will be speaking tomorrow. They are the investigators. They are the ones who do the work to try to get the answers to what's going on. Paula Harris, a remarkable guest. Here she is.
Paula, first I want to ask you, just get your brief reaction to this story about the Vatican. Now, you've been talking to the Monsignor for years now. He has echoed this all along. It was really never picked up by mainstream as much as this one has. Give me your take on the Vatican's chief astronomer simply saying now that, hey, there's no contradiction here. If there is alien life, you're not saying there is, but he said if there is, it's okay. What do you think?
Well, I think that anything that comes out in public like this, that's in any newspaper, especially now it's even in the American newspapers, is sanctioned by the Vatican. We're coming down to the wire, Georgia, the way I look at it. There's something happening here, and something that needs preparing. In other words, I think that the big top institutions, and Vatican is the major one, is one of the major ones, is preparing us for something. And the idea that Father Fuentes is 45 years old, is a young Jesuit priest and replaced Father Coyne in 2006. Right there, I looked at this situation and thought, okay, well, there must be, like in NASA and everywhere else, a battle inside the Vatican for disclosure. And we have one younger Jesuit that probably has talked them into coming out to at least prepare the terrain. He's not saying there is extraterrestrial life, George. What he's saying is that if there is, and he made a strong statement, he said, the extraterrestrial is my brother.
Yeah.
You know, my brother.
That's pretty strong.
The existence of aliens is like, ruling out this existence is like putting limits in God's creation.
Alfred Weber, who was a guest yesterday here at the X Conference, said last night on Coast to Coast that he has a letter from the Vatican which basically stated that the priest in question was acting on his own behalf. That it wasn't endorsed by the Vatican. However, Alfred and I believe that the Vatican fully knew what he was doing and kind of wanted him to start leaking this out to the world. That too adds to the puzzle of what is going on, disclosure. When I was 21 years old, my first radio job as a reporter in Detroit, my very first assignment, interview, was with Stanton Friedman. I call Stanton now the father of modern-day ufology. Ever since Dr. J. O. Hynek has passed away, Stan has basically taken up that position. A remarkable man with incredible energy, visits hundreds of universities in his career, speaking engagements all around this planet, just doesn't stop trying to get to the bottom of this UFO field. Here he is, our last clip.
Really, with ufology, people want to ask the wrong question, which is, what are UFOs? Well, UFOs are all kinds of things. Well, you're not saying all UFOs are really spacecraft, are you? Of course I'm not. I'm saying some are. That's very important. And, the some that are. And so, I look around at the world we live in today, and if somebody was asking, why would anybody come to this place with the mess we have here?
Especially now.
Well, yeah, I say, hey, it's to keep us from going out there.
I mean, in my day, Stan, I had to come back after I covered that with you on my own because I loved it. I loved UFOs. And I came back with the tape. I'm 21 years old, and my news director said, hey, George, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm editing this story I put together about UFOs. And he said, why not I use that? Well, I convinced him to use it. And we got more response to that with your speech than anything they had done. And he then said, go do all the things you want to do. But you're right, the media then wasn't as interested. It was more laughable than it is today.
Well, yeah, and it's a lack of courage. I keep citing to people I had a classroom with 100 students at a college, and I said, I want to get what you think about this, not what your buddy sitting next to you thinks. So please close your eyes, vote with your hand. Your instructor and I will count the results. To make a long story short, 80% of the students, or about 100 students, thought that most people didn't think that there was anything to UFOs. But 80% of that group did think that there was something to UFOs, that some UFOs were alien spacecraft. Now, there's a big dichotomy there. People's actions, apparently, are dependent on their perception of how other people will respond. Not their own feeling about it. And if their perception is wrong, too bad. That's why only 10% of the people who admit, another 10% that they've had a sighting after my lectures, only 10% of the 10% reported what they saw.
And there's the list of 10. A short list of people, many, many more have been on Coast to Coast, who continue to work full-time to try to get the answers to the question of UFOs. Do they exist? What happened to me a long time ago when I was a little boy, my mother brought home a book called We Are Not Alone, which was written by the then New York Times science writer Walter Sullivan. And I was hooked after that. I looked into the Look magazine article of Benny and Barney Hill and that abduction, and I couldn't stop. And it pushed me, and it drove me to do what I'm doing today. I got into broadcasting because I wanted to get these answers. As a matter of fact, when I was a little kid, I used to build, I've told this story in other cities, little rockets. Those little model rockets when we were kids. And you'd launch them. And I used to put little frogs in these things, and they'd go up, and they'd come down with a parachute. The frog was okay, and I'd let him go, so he could tell his other frogs to keep away from that guy. And I had a great time, but what we used to do, you talk about synchronicity and how things affect us as we were kids. So I used to do this with a buddy of mine named Gary Frank. And we would build these rockets. Now, Gary's role, and we must have been 13 years old, his role was to hook up the little electrodes to these little solid propellant engines in the rocket and launch them. Let them go. And my role was to broadcast the launch to the neighborhood. So, he's putting the little electrodes on, and he's ready to launch the engine. And there I am with my little squeaky voice, going 10, 9, 8, 7, whoosh, off it goes. I, of course, go into broadcasting. Go figure. What does Gary Frank end up doing? Building the engines for the space shuttle. It's a small world. And then you talk about synchronicity. Why do things happen the way they do? One of the reasons why I continue to do Coast to Coast is because I want these answers. And during that same period, one of our other little friends, his name was Michael Kozakowski. Little Michael, his job was to go and get the rocket after it launched and float it away. I wasn't going to do it. And so these things would go up a half a mile, catch a breeze, and they were gone. Well, it was Michael's job to go and rush and catch the rocket and bring it back to us. Well, on the day of one of our launches, he was sick. He called me up and was disappointed and wanted us to cancel the launch. And I said, no, Michael, we can't. We've got a time schedule here. We've got a certain window. So Gary hooks up the rocket, I broadcast it, the thing takes off, and there's no Michael. So we're all trying to look for this thing, and we're running, and we're chasing it, and it's blowing, and it's blowing, and it's blowing. 3 blocks, 4 blocks, 5 blocks, finally lands. When we get to it, it's in the backyard, and who's holding it? But Michael Kozakowski. It was his backyard.